Hi, welcome to my second lecture on the Ruy Lopez opening. And the Ruy Lopez starts by e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and last time I covered the basics of the Ruy Lopez and the move knight to f6, which is called the Berlin defense. And I said in this lecture I would cover the next, actually the most popular move, which is a6, which is commonly referred to as the Morphy's defense. So let's see what happens. So black plays a6, and basically now white has two basic options that are commonly played. So here are the opening moves. Bishop a4, which is we're going to call the main line. Remember, I said there's like more than 30 named lines in the Ruy Lopez. We can't cover them all. So, whoops, I found a spelling mistake. And then knight takes c6, which is called the exchange variation. So, basically what happened is black has played a6, and it's making the bishop here declare its intentions. You know, are we going to move the bishop away? Are we going to capture the knight? What are we going to do? So first let's just start out with the exchange variation, which is where white actually takes the knight. Okay, so bishop takes c6, and then what would follow is d takes c6, and this move may not be apparent why we would take with the d pawn instead of the b pawn, because normally, like in this position, let's back up, the common thought is always capture towards the center unless there's a good reason, and in this case there is a good reason to actually capture with the d pawn, because if you look at it, it almost looks like white can now win this pawn. Okay, and really white cannot win this pawn. I'll show you why. Let's say white decides to take the pawn. Okay, now the follow-up is actually queen to d4, where black now attacks the knight and the pawn. Obviously white cannot hold on to both with a single move. There's no single move which will protect both the knight and the pawn, and white has two basic options at this point. Most commonly people will actually play the knight back to f3. The other move is actually g4. So let me show you what happens in both quickly. If you play your knight back to f3, black's going to capture the pawn with check. You can always move your king over, but the most common move is queen e2, and now the queens are just traded off. This is what the game looks like. Okay, so let's back up to where the queen was once again attacking both the knight and the pawn. Like I said, you could always move to g4. Then what happens, it almost looks like this move looks wrong, but actually after the queen takes with check, the knight actually just moves to e3, and notice that now it's blocking, and it's also protecting this square because sort of black was also aiming at this pawn. And now the king can just castle, and the queens are left on the board. So let's back up. So obviously we don't want to take this pawn in the exchange variation. Remember, we were sort of, you know, black just moved its pawn up, and we just exchanged. And now we really don't want to capture that pawn. So the most normal move is castles. And now black is forced to now defend this pawn. Why? Because if it doesn't, what will happen is, remember last time, if we take this pawn, you know, then the queen comes down attacking, and then we'll move our knight away, and then the queen will capture. Well, now this rook will just move over, and the queen will be pinned against the king, and we'll end up winning the queen. So now black must actually take time to defend her. Just let me show you that real quick. So what happens, you know, let's say white decides to, oh, it's actually black's move, so let's just say black made some silly move like that. The white captures. Oops, I guess, well, believe me, for some reason my engine is not allowing me to make that move, so let me just move on. So the most common move is actually castles, and then f6. Now, I always, my lecture with the king pawn, I always said that white always wants to get in this move d4 to help control the center, and that's what white plays. And now, obviously, black wants to recapture, because if there's a capture and a recapture, you know, if you think about it, what happens is one of the reasons why white took this knight was to disrupt the pawn structure, and now if white can capture and recapture, the black's pawn structure will even be worse off. So black is going to now capture back with a knight. Now, basically, black will play c5, poking the knight. The knight is forced to move away. Then black will exchange queens. And that's sort of the end of the exchange variation. Okay, let me back up before the exchange variation. So, it's our starting position. Remember, I said that the most common move was actually a4, so let's sort of go through that. So white plays a4, or bishop a4, sorry. And now the most logical move is knight f6, sort of attacking the e-pawn. You know, white still can't really, you know, now it's white's move. White really still can't take this pawn here because of our previous discussions. Even after, you know, we were to take this knight. I think I covered this in the open and the Berlin defense. So white's most common move is the castle. And now we're sort of at the point to where the roads divide once again. We come to the main sort of forks in the road. So this is where we are. Okay, we just played through these moves. Most common moves are bishop e7, which is called the closed defense, b5, which is called the Arkhangelsk, or I think that means like archangel in Russian. I know I'm not pronouncing it right. And then knight takes e4, which is the open defense. So the most common moves, once again, closed defense, bishop e7, the archangel defense, b5, and then the open defense where the knight takes. Let me discuss the open defense. It's probably where the knight takes. Basically, there's two main lines, and these look just like the Berlin defense. I'm just going to cover them real quick. White can easily regain the pawn by moving rook to e1. You know, now the knight has to move away. Look how much this was common with the Berlin defense. The bishop takes. You know, we take back with the pawn, and then the knight takes. And then to prevent the discovered attack, black moves bishop e7. This is just like the Berlin defense. Also, instead of moving rook e1, just like in the Berlin defense, white can move d4. But in this case, white's going to play b5, which the bishop will just move away. And then black plays d5, and then we just exchange. Then we get our pawn, and then black will just play that. A little bit different than the Berlin defense. The rook e1 is very much like the Berlin defense. This has some commonalities to the Berlin defense. Now let's just cover. Well, that was the open defense. Back up a move, and let's cover b5 extremely quickly. So obviously white's going to move away. And the idea with the Archangel defense is black wants to move its bishop to here. We'll sort of go along this diagonal, and then we'll bring its bishop here. and have this diagonal, so it's going to have two great diagonals for the bishop. So, whoops, bishop moves away, bishop to b7, rook to e1 to defend the e-pawn, bishop b5, just continuing with the plan. And then if you don't know, white's main idea is to play c3 and d4. Sort of very common to the Italian game. White wants to get in d4, but it's going to support it by first playing c3. So that's what we're going to do. c3. Basically, black plays d6 to support the e-pawn. And then white plays d4. Then the bishop just backs off.